There is a specific kind of comfort found in a small American town, a place where the streets are lined with old oak trees, where the local diner knows your morning coffee order, and where people still leave their front doors completely unlocked at night. It is the illusion of absolute safety. We believe that in a town where everyone knows your name, you are protected by the herd. But there is a terrifying flip side to that intimacy. What happens when the people who know you best decide to use your deepest secrets against you? What happens when the comforting gaze of your neighbors turns into the suffocating stare of a predator? Welcome to our deep dive into one of the most sinister and entirely unsolved psychological thrillers in American history. A story not of ghosts or monsters hiding in the deep woods, but of a real, physical entity who poisoned an entire community without ever showing their face. This is Chapter 1, The Poison Pen. In the spring of 1977, the quiet town of Circleville, Ohio, was the picture of Midwestern peace. It was a close-knit community of just over 11,000 people. Everyone went to the same high school football games. Everyone attended the same churches. There were no secrets in Circleville, or so they thought. The nightmare began quietly, slipping through the metal slot of a rusted mailbox. Mary Gillespie was a local school bus driver, a completely normal woman with a normal family. One morning, she opened her mail to find a stark, white envelope. It was postmarked from Columbus, a city 30 miles to the north. There was no return address. The handwriting on the envelope was bizarre, written in sharp, heavy block letters. It looked aggressive. It looked angry. Mary tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper filled with the same jagged handwriting. The letter did not ask for money. It did not make political demands. It was a direct, vicious, and deeply personal attack. The writer accused Mary of having a secret affair with the local school superintendent. But it was not just a rumor. The writer knew terrifying, specific details. They knew Mary's exact daily bus route. They knew what time she left her house. They knew where she parked her car. The letter ended with a chilling threat. "I know where you live. I have been observing your house and know you have children. This is no joke. Please take it serious." Imagine that exact feeling. You are standing in your own driveway, holding a piece of paper that proves an invisible entity has been watching you. The sanctuary of your home is instantly shattered. Every time Mary looked out her kitchen window, every time a car drove slowly past her house, she wondered if the eyes of the writer were staring back at her. Mary hid the letter, hoping it was a sick, isolated prank. But the writer was just getting started. A few days later, another letter arrived. Then another. The tone grew more violent, more demanding. The writer ordered Mary to publicly confess to the affair and quit her job, or her life would be destroyed. When Mary refused to break, the writer changed tactics. They sent a letter directly to her husband, Ron Gillespie. The letter to Ron was blunt and cruel. It told him his wife was unfaithful and that if he did not put a stop to it, his life was in extreme danger. The psychological pressure on the Gillespie family became unbearable. They confided in a few close friends and family members. They tried to set traps. They tried to guess who, in their small circle of friends, could be harboring such intense, venomous hatred. They even wrote fake letters back and planted them in secret locations, hoping to draw the stalker out into the open. But the writer was always one step ahead. They were invisible. They were everywhere. By August of 1977, the situation reached a boiling point. The letters had become a daily psychological torment. The invisible watcher was slowly tearing Ron's sanity apart. He was a man pushed to the absolute edge, living in a constant state of paranoia and exhaustion. On the night of August 19th, the phone in the Gillespie house rang. Ron answered it. Nobody knows exactly what was said on the other end of the line. But whatever the voice told him, it sent Ron into a blind, desperate rage. Ron grabbed his heavy .38 caliber revolver. He stormed out of the house, got into his pickup truck, and sped off into the pitch-black Ohio night. He told his children he knew exactly who the writer was, and he was going to end the nightmare once and for all. He drove wildly down a dark, rural country road. But Ron never reached his destination. Miles away from his home, his truck lost control, veered violently off the asphalt, and slammed head-on into a massive oak tree. When the police arrived at the twisted, smoking wreckage, they found Ron dead behind the wheel. The initial thought was a tragic, high-speed crash. But the coroner's report revealed a terrifying, impossible detail. Ron did not die from the blunt force trauma of hitting the tree. Before the truck ever left the road, Ron Gillespie had been shot in the head with his own revolver. The town of Circleville was instantly paralyzed by fear. The invisible watcher had claimed their first victim. But the nightmare was not over. The writer was just warming up. When we return in Chapter 2, we will explore the terrifying booby trap left on the empty school bus route, and what happens when the poison letters start arriving in every single mailbox in town. When a man dies violently in a small town, the community mourns. But when the death is surrounded by anonymous, venomous threats, the mourning turns into a suffocating, collective paranoia. The local police officially ruled Ron Gillespie's death an accident, claiming his revolver had somehow discharged when the truck hit the tree. But the people of Circleville knew the truth. The invisible writer had pulled the trigger. This is Chapter 2, The Booby Trap. If the writer had stopped after Ron died, the town might have eventually moved on. But the death of Ron Gillespie did not satisfy the poison pen. It only made the writer bolder. The letters did not stop. They multiplied. The writer began targeting the entire town. It was a mass psychological infection. Letters started appearing in the mailboxes of the mayor, the chief of police, local business owners, and ordinary citizens. The envelopes contained vile, deeply personal accusations, affairs, embezzlement, hidden crimes. The invisible watcher knew every dark corner of Circleville. Neighbors stopped talking to each other. People began locking their doors during the day. Anyone standing in line at the grocery store or sitting in the pew at church could be the person destroying their lives. But the primary obsession remained Mary Gillespie. Despite the tragic loss of her husband and the constant psychological torture, Mary refused to break. She kept her job. Every single morning, she drove her heavy yellow school bus down the quiet, rural routes of the Ohio countryside. 6 years passed. The year was 1983. It was a freezing February afternoon. Mary was driving her empty bus down a lonely stretch of country road, having just dropped off the last student. As she rounded a sharp curve, she saw something tied to a wooden fence post right next to the road. It was a crude, handmade sign, written in that same unmistakable, jagged block handwriting. The sign contained a vulgar threat directed specifically at Mary. Furious and exhausted by 6 years of torment, Mary stopped the heavy bus. She left the engine running and stepped out onto the cold asphalt. She walked up to the fence to rip the sign down. But as she reached out, she noticed a small, innocuous-looking wooden box hidden behind the sign, tied to the post with a piece of twine. Mary grabbed the sign and pulled. She heard a sharp, mechanical click, but nothing happened. Mary looked closer at the box. She carefully opened the lid. Inside was a fully loaded .22 caliber pistol. The trigger of the gun was tied directly to a string, which was connected to the sign she had just pulled. The barrel was pointed straight at her chest. It was a lethal booby trap designed to shoot her point blank the moment she ripped the sign away. Mary was alive only because the string had been tied slightly too loose. The trap had failed to fire by a fraction of an inch. She carefully took the gun, got back onto the bus, and drove straight to the police station. The authorities were stunned. The invisible writer had escalated from psychological warfare to attempted murder. They finally had a physical piece of evidence. A murder weapon left at the scene. The police traced the serial number on the .22 caliber pistol. They expected to find a phantom, a stolen weapon, a dead end. Instead, the trace led them directly to a man living right there in the community. The owner of the gun was Paul Freshour. Paul was not a stranger. He was Mary Gillespie's own brother-in-law, the husband of Ron's sister. The police arrested Paul. They searched his house and found a piece of twine that perfectly matched the string used in the booby trap. Paul swore he was innocent. He claimed the gun had been stolen from his garage weeks ago. He claimed he was being framed by the real writer, but the town had their monster. Paul was put on trial, convicted of attempted murder, and sentenced to up to 25 years in a maximum security state penitentiary. The town of Circleville breathed a collective sigh of relief. The nightmare was finally over. The monster was locked in a cage. But when we return in our third and final chapter, we will discover the most terrifying twist in the history of the poisoned pen. Because when Paul was locked in solitary confinement, the impossible happened. There is a terrifying finality to the sound of a heavy iron cell door slamming shut. When Paul Frashar was locked inside a maximum security prison in 1983, the town of Circleville finally exhaled. The booby trap had failed. The invisible writer had been unmasked and caged. The poison pen was broken. People went back to leaving their doors unlocked. The nightmare was supposed to be over. This is Chapter 3, The Locked Cell. A few months after Paul was sent to prison, Mary Gillespie walked out to her mailbox. The morning air was crisp and quiet. She opened the metal door and looked inside. Sitting there, stark white against the dark metal, was an envelope. The postmark was from Columbus. The handwriting was sharp, heavy, and written in jagged block letters. Mary's heart stopped completely. She tore it open. The letter mocked her. It mocked the police. The writer was still out there. Over the next few weeks, the letters began flooding back into Circleville. They arrived at the police station. They arrived at the mayor's office. They arrived in the mailboxes of ordinary citizens. The handwriting was completely identical. The deeply personal, dark secrets were just as accurate. The invisible watcher had never left. The police were completely baffled. How could Paul Frashar be sending hundreds of letters from a maximum security prison? He was kept in strict isolation. His mail was heavily monitored and inspected by guards. He had absolutely no access to the outside world, no stamps, and no way to postmark letters from a city 30 miles away. The terrifying reality slowly settled over the town. They had locked up the wrong man. The true author of the Circleville letters was still walking the streets, completely free, watching the chaos unfold. The writer even sent a letter directly to Paul inside his prison cell. The letter read, "Now, when are you going to believe you are not going to get out of there? I told you 2 years ago. When we set them up, they stay set up. Do you really think they will ever catch me?" Paul Frashar spent exactly 10 years in that maximum security prison. He was denied parole multiple times for one simple reason. He absolutely refused to admit guilt for a crime he said he did not commit. He served his entire sentence, day by agonizing day, while the real monster continued to terrorize his family and his town. When Paul was finally released in 1994, the letters slowly began to stop. The invisible watcher simply faded back into the shadows of the Midwestern suburbs. Paul maintained his absolute innocence until the day he died in 2012. To his last breath, he claimed he was the ultimate victim of the poison pen. Today, the true identity of the Circleville writer remains one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in American history. It proves that the most terrifying monsters do not hide under your bed or in the deep woods. They live next door. They smile at you in the grocery store. They wave to you from their driveways. They know exactly what time you leave your house, and they know the secrets you thought you buried forever. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the dark heart of Circleville. If you have a neighbor who watches you just a little too closely, you might want to double-check your mailbox tomorrow morning. If you survive this psychological nightmare, please subscribe to DeepStory, turn on the notification bell, and leave a like to support our investigations. Keep your doors locked, trust no one, and I will see you in the next dark chapter.